Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Honest HR Nitrous. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is the live stream I do a couple of times a week where we talk about job search, careers, everything to do with that kind of thing. And this is primarily a Q&A. So if you are seeing my beautiful face right now, you should see a chat box somewhere in the vicinity of my face, depending on what device you're watching this on. Get into the chat and let me know what's up with you, what you're wondering about, what you're struggling with, and I will do my best to help you. That's the whole point of this. And this is episode number 83 of Honest HR Nitrous, and this episode is called For Everyone Between Jobs, Live Q&A with Job Search Help That Works. So if you have been a subscriber to my channel for any amount of time, you should be able to get in the chat and ask me some questions. And I will do my best to help you out. Yes, exactly. I've been having some technical problems with my setup the last 24 hours or so. So hopefully you can see and hear me okay. Everything is fine. I had some technical hitches. I was trying to live stream this morning, but it did work. Just that some of my the screens and stuff that I see were going haywire. So hopefully you can see me, you can hear me, you get in the chat, and that's what you're here to do. Okay, for everyone between jobs, this is not easy, and if you are trying to understand what you should be doing in a job search, what you can do, there's a huge discussion around that, absolutely huge. There's many different ways of getting a job, and of those different ways, you can go about it in multiple ways. So if you are simply applying to jobs online, that's great. That's kind of a default method for a lot of people applying for posted jobs. There's a lot of advantages. But there's many other ways. And something that you may be surprised to know is that the method of applying for posted jobs online is actually not the way that most people get hired. And if this is new for you, you can do your own research and confirm that. Even if you just talk to like ChatGPT or an AI or something like that, you can confirm it. You could do a Google search and see that that's true. The most popular method that people get hired is through some form of networking. Networking simply means people talking to other people, and it involves a ton of different activities, some of which you build on a network that you've already created. So you know a lot of people and you have connections, you build on that, right? You take advantage of it. Other methods of networking, it doesn't depend on you knowing a bunch of people. You go out and you create the connection. So you reach out to employers directly and talk to people that have the potential to hire someone like you. So, and there's all kinds of other things. There's applying for jobs in person. There's all kinds of different some more exotic than others. But my point is that if you're just doing one thing, don't do just one thing. A proper job search campaign that gives you the best chance of getting hired includes a couple of different activities, right? So you do more than one thing. You do 2, 3, or 4, or even more approaches, okay? Vectors, whatever you call them, to get a job. That's how this stuff works. And there's a lot of stuff. There's some, like probably the most basic method to get a job is either applying to posted jobs, at least in the sense that it is the most obvious method. It is not the least labor-intensive method. The least labor-intensive method is actually showing up. Like, for example, a lot of manual labor jobs, you kind of show up on the day and bam, you're in, first come, first serve kind of thing. Those are kind of some of the most basic ways to get a job. And it goes all the way up to things like growth opportunities. Growth opportunities, I don't talk about it too much on my channel because not many people ask about it, but it's a method that a lot of high-level people get jobs. That is where you essentially find out what companies are coming to town, right? What employers are coming to town, and there are ways to find this out if you know where to look. A lot of cities will have their version of an economic development department of the municipal government or of the provincial or state government, or sometimes even federal government. And there are other channels also that you can look and you can find out who's setting up shop in your hometown. And then what you do is you reach out to those companies, you reach out to the person. There's a way to sort of find out the person most directly involved in that. And then you volunteer your services to be a guide and to help them get set up in your hometown because you know the town and you have a lot of skills that apply to them. So that's, for example, a more high-level way, a more exotic way of getting a job, but it is still something that happens, right? There's everything in between, from volunteering and all kinds of different things. So get in the chat and I will help you out. Frederick is here. So Frederick wins the prize for being the first person in the chat today. You win a virtual handshake from me. And who wouldn't want that? It goes something like this. Anyway, Frederick says, showing up is basic, but is a very genuine and solid way. Yeah, it doesn't matter how basic it is as long as it's effective, right? And there are many different versions of this too, right? I talked about something on the very low end. I talked about the example of a manual labor job, right? And maybe in construction or skilled trades or anything like that, where you show up and they're looking for casual labor, and it's just a very simple, straightforward process. There's other versions of it that are more high level, right? Things like informational interviews, things like direct outreach. Those are types of things where you could be talking to hiring managers that could be anywhere from supervisors all the way to board members, and you're showing up and talking to them. And the idea is that you impress people not by what you say about yourself on your resume, but what you demonstrate when you do that. That's the idea. That's how you elevate yourself above the crowd. You're the only one that showed up. And when you did, first of all, you signaled your initiative. You signaled your desire to work there, okay? They also got a free sample of how professional you were, how awesome you were to deal with as a person, your communication skills, your soft skills, all that kind of thing. If you do have the opportunity to talk shop with the hiring manager or whoever else you are connecting with, they can also see directly that you know your stuff. So it's not about talking about how awesome you are. It's about showing them directly how awesome you are. And that's a way for people to get hired. If you're the type of person that can go head to head with 700 other applicants and beat them hands down on a level playing field in terms of skill and in terms of all the different traits and things, if you're that type of person, congratulations, all the best luck to you. But for the other 699 people that tend to not be the clear winner when you're put on a level playing field with hundreds of other people, you can still win by doing things like this because you're the only one that showed up, right? That's the idea. So there's a lot of different things that in this world of how to get hired, right? There's many different ways in, many different skills required. And if you are just doing one thing, like applying to posted jobs, just know that you're missing out on the vast majority of a lot of the good jobs out there. And that if you learn about some of these other methods, they can open up a lot more opportunities for you. Even if you're an introvert like me, you're not some raging extrovert type, you're an introvert. There are a lot of vectors for you to do that you can be quite good at that are out there. Okay, Frederick says, remember to be yourself so the company get what they see and you will be happy. Okay, great. Cool, thanks. Yes, that's right. That's the power of a virtual handshake. People never feel quite the same again. It has such a huge impact on them. Get in the chat. Let me know what questions you might have, what you're wondering about, what you're struggling with when it comes to job search. I am here to simply answer your questions. I don't have anything that I'm sort of saying, I'm monologuing about. I'm simply here to answer your questions. Get in the chat, ask me some questions, and I will help you out. Yes, and it is a cloudy day, so the brightness in my room here is going to be varying because I have an actual window behind me. And I do have lights, but They are not so powerful that they can blot out the sun. So I'll be adjusting my camera brightness as I go. That's how professional I am. Yeah. There are 11 people here. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. A shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members and my Patreons, my super thanks donors, and of course to you. Thank you for being here. So Frederick was leading the charge with asking a question in the chat box, in the comments. Get in the chat box and ask me some questions, whatever you're wondering about when it comes to hiring. This is also the live stream where we talk about the gritty reality of how job search and hiring occurs in the real world. We're not here talking about theory. We're talking about the reality of what actually transpires, right? That includes ghosting, that includes fake jobs, that includes incompetent and unprofessional recruiters and hiring managers that you encounter. We're talking about the rejection. We're talking about every facet of this. Eddie DeVere is here. Eddie DeVere says, I always wonder how people are able to get jobs where it is not exactly the same thing as what they've done in the past, where there is a big missing piece that they do not have for the job. Excellent question, Eddie. You know, I don't recall ever actually being asked that, but yet that's like the elephant in the room. We see this all the time, and I myself, like for example, I've worked across 5 industries, and I've been the CEO of a company in one of them. And you raise an awesome point, because I'm a generalist, unlike a lot of people who are specialists, where they get a job, a career type job in one area, and then they go deep. They pick a career path or a track, and they just keep going down that path, right? And they get more and more senior as they go, and more experienced in that one area, right? There are a lot of people that don't follow that. There are people that jump around, and not just people at the bottom level, people at, the mid-level and the high level, same thing. Eddie says, do people just show up for interviews and then try to say, I don't know this area, which is important, but I can learn on the job? Well, Eddie, here is usually how it goes. I don't want to say this is how it goes, because there's always exceptions, but this is usually how that works. Okay? First of all, hopefully everybody understands the difference between a recruiter and a hiring manager. Recruiter is someone who works in the HR department. They have received some kind of certificate or whatnot in HR that usually means learning about labor laws and employment standards and hiring practices and stuff like that, right? But in the real world, you get a recruiter that posts a job for, say, an accountant, right? The recruiter is then conducting job interviews with accountants who want the accounting job. What the hell does the recruiter know about accounting? Nothing, right? Because they didn't study accounting at school. They studied HR, right? Today, it might be an accounting job they're trying to fill. Tomorrow, it might be a customer service job they're trying to fill, right? So they know nothing about the subject matter or industry of the job itself. Usually, not always, but usually, right? Okay, so as a result, when they interview you, they're not talking shop. If you're an accountant, they're not talking accounting with you. They're talking about, what are your salary expectations, and where do you see yourself in 5 years, and why do you want to work here? That's what they're talking about. They're asking about the soft skills, and they're probing for the soft skills, and they're probing for red flags that indicate you might not work out if they were to pick you, right? Okay. Now, what is the number one metric for recruiters? Years of experience, right? And recruiters have been told in school, and I know this because I used to teach recruiters, they have been told that if you want someone who can do a job, you find someone who has done that job before. And the more years of experience they have, the better they will be in the job, all things being equal, right? Well, you and I know that isn't always true, right? Just because someone has been an accountant for 20 years and someone else has been an accountant for 7 years doesn't necessarily mean the person with more experience is the better employee, right? The other problem with using this philosophy is that no one would ever change careers. Because if you are changing careers to something new, by definition, you have 0 years experience in the job you're trying to get. You're going to an area in which you have never worked, right? So does that mean people don't change careers? Absolutely not. We see it every day. People are constantly changing careers. The number one reason how they get the job in a different area, different industry, that kind of thing, is because they are not talking to a recruiter. They are not being validated or assessed according to the rules I have just mentioned. Instead, they're usually talking to a hiring manager. The hiring manager is not a recruiter. The hiring manager is the person that if you get the job, that person will be your boss. You will report to them, right? So in the example I just stated, the hiring manager would be probably a chief accountant of some sort, like a controller or, a CFO or something like that, right? So there's a big difference between a CFO and a recruiter, right? 2 different types of people, 2 different backgrounds, 2 different levels. Okay? So if you want to change careers, usually it's because the person spoke to the CFO. They spoke to the hiring manager, right? And the person said something along the lines of, listen, I've never worked as an accountant before, but now accountant is maybe a bad example because you need a license to practice accounting and all this kind of stuff. But let's pretend for the sake of this example, you didn't need a license to do it. Okay. So you say, listen, I've never been an accountant before, but I've worked for a year as a bookkeeper while I was in college. And, I've studied accounting and I worked in a place where I was near accountants. I didn't do accounting, but I worked with accountants. I had to interface with them to do my job. So I had the opportunity to see what they did and all this kind of stuff. And I got this certificate in accounting just recently. So, I really feel I could do it. And if you have something part-time or something, just kind of like a probationary kind of thing, and you're looking for someone who can do this and this and this, I would love to do that for you. I believe I could be a great accountant because I'm passionate about accounting and blah, blah, blah. This kind of thing, right? They talk to the hiring manager. The hiring manager, they're a chief accountant, so they can talk to you about accounting, unlike the recruiter who can't. And you talk shop with the hiring manager. They see that you know your stuff. They talk about accounting. They talk about, the preferred methods that they use. They talk about where they think it's going and why. You join that discussion and you contribute and you say interesting things that are correct and they agree with you, and they can see you know what you're talking about, right? So they go, you know what? Yes, we have something. It's part-time, but only for 3 months. It's kind of a probationary thing. If you're interested, I can put you up for that. And, we'll see how it goes. And then, if they give you a chance and you show that you are working with accountants and you do a great job and all the other accountants think, you can really hold your own, then a permanent position opens up 3 months later and they go, okay, yeah, I think we can give you a shot, right? So I'm just sort of making this up as I go along, but that's an example that's more typical of how people change careers. It's not, you don't go through the standard official hiring practice where you're dealing with recruiters and resumes and ATS and, job interviews where they look at years of experience and things like this. You're bypassing that. And like I said at the very beginning of this live stream, I know this is taking very long. I'll just wrap this up very quickly. Like I said at the beginning of this live stream, the reason that works is because you're not in a conventional job interview with a recruiter. You're not talking about how you're awesome. Okay? You're showing them directly how awesome you are. You're the one that showed up. You're the one that they're having conversations with. You're the one that's talking shop with them and showing that you understand the material, you get along with them, great. They're getting a free sample of your professionalism, your communication skills, your agreeableness, your ability to collaborate with others, and so on, right? It's not about talking about how cool you are. It's about showing them, right? That's usually how people change careers. And you know what? In my experience, the vast majority of jobs that aren't professions where you need licenses to do that job, the vast majority of jobs, especially at the low level, they're not rocket science. If you're reasonably intelligent, you can learn it, you can pick it up, given like the chance. 2-3 months, you can really hold your own after that, So that's how people change careers in a I don't say a nutshell because that took forever, but hopefully that makes sense. Ashlyn says, I'm trying to find a remote job. I've been working remotely for years in the same industry. However, I'm having a hard time landing a job. Is remote work going down the tubes? I don't think so. It is here to stay, but depending on what industry you're in, some industries are pushing back on it. They have been pushing back on it since the pandemic. Others, they've kind of accepted it as kind of the new normal. They're trying to weave in some hybrid thing, usually is what we're seeing. So there is stuff out there for remote work. It's not like, obviously, 5 years ago, it was like it hit a peak, right? And they've sort of tried to get everyone back to the office to a degree, and that varies by region and by industry. But they are there. They are there. Okay. It's a more desirable job, so the competition is more fierce for those types of jobs. But yeah, it's still there. It's not going down the tubes necessarily. I think we've sort of stabilized. Now, next Monday, I'm doing a collaboration with another YouTuber who is a professional recruiter. And if you show up there, we can certainly ask her about that, what she's seeing on her end as a recruiter. But as far as I know, it's not like a declining thing. It's sort of stabilized. Helicopter says, hi, I have a question. For 2 interviews in a row now, I've been asked how I ended up in payroll from accounting. How do I answer that? Truth is, I'm friends with a VP and he selected me for the role. Okay. Why can't you just say a sanitized version of that? I'm wondering. It's like, well, people saw my potential and my ability to pick up things quickly and learn things properly to be able. I'm very, very trainable. I'm very agreeable. I'm very professional. And, payroll and accounting, there's quite a bit of overlap. You have to be responsible. You have to understand confidentiality. You know what I mean? You're dealing with some very important stuff, and attention to detail and, accounting type skills are obviously required for both. They're both closely related, like accounting and payroll they're quite overlap. In a lot of smaller companies, if a company has 50 people or something, usually you have one accountant type employee. Usually they're labeled like as controller or something like that. They will normally handle both the accounting and payroll, right, as part of their duties. They're very closely related. So, it's a logical kind of move if one is interested in that type of thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think this is a real brain tease to explain. It's quite a normal, logical thing. There's a lot of overlap between those two positions and between the nature of the jobs for handling them. The big thing is that you've got some technical skills combined with the soft skills required to handle something confidential, personal, and very important, right? So yeah, that plus, I wouldn't say necessarily I'm friends with a VP, but I was noticed for my ability to do a good job in this area, and based on that, people saw my potential, I imagine, and they offered me this. I would phrase it like that, and it does make sense because of the overlap, blah blah blah, So I think that something along those lines would do nicely. I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that story or find it fishy. Frederick, isn't it very unprofessional for companies to have fake job ads? I don't know how to respond to that. Sure, yeah, whatever. It's unprofessional. I mean, that's a perspective. It's definitely misleading, right? You know what I mean? Now, whether it's crossing an ethical gray, it is an ethical gray area. Whether it's crossing the line, I don't know. But it's something that they can do legally, so they do it because it gives them an advantage. Like a lot of things in this world, when you don't understand how the world works, and you assume it means a certain thing, and then you find out actually something else is going on, and you learn that, oh, they are doing that. It's disappointing, So I don't know if you'd call it unprofessional. I would call it misleading. I would call it an ethical gray area. I think it's just a cheap and underhanded way of trying to further your interest, trying to signal good things. Or, the thing about fake job ads is that the companies the employers that do fake jobs, they're doing it for a variety of reasons. Some are pretty damn benign, like they had a real job, but now that the job is filled, they posted it everywhere. They forgot to go and take down the ads. Like it wasn't any deception intended. It was just, the person, the recruiter, whoever that was in charge of this was overworked. There's not enough hours in the day for them to do this, and they weren't told to do it and paid to do it. So like if you weren't paid to do something, would you do it? You know what I mean? Like so you can argue it's really benign, I suppose. I'm being kind to these people. It's unprofessional. It's sloppy. It's deceptive. But there's something on that end, and on the other end, it's like a total scam. It's fraud. It's people that are trying to do identity theft, get your personal information, do social engineering. Like it's just fraudulent, like blatantly unethical. You know what I mean? So, and then there's all kinds of things in between, right? So it's hard to just say it's one thing or not, But one thing it definitely is, I can say is it's misleading, especially for younger people that aren't aware that this is a thing, I'm not trying to defend it, but when you say it's an unprofessional, no. That's not the word I would use. Eddie says, wow, very useful answer. This is great info for strategizing. Thank you. Okay, good. I'm glad you're getting something out of this. Frederick says, similarly, 10 years of experience can carry just as much weight as 20 years of experience. Possibly 20 years of experience can make getting through the first stage of the recruitment process easier. Yeah, if you're doing it that way. But usually after 20 years, hopefully, you're not getting a job by going through a recruiter and to a company where you have no contacts, Come on, like after 20 years, hopefully you're savvy enough to get a job the way most people get a job, which is through networking, right? By either reaching out to the company and talking to the individuals, or, you just happen to have someone there. That usually is not how it works, but at least you can reach out, right? So yeah, after 20 years, the goal should be to not get a job through a job posting like you're a 21-year-old. In which case, all these rules cease to apply. They don't matter. They're not rules, right? Well, 20 years experience here is more important than this education here or 10 years experience. Those aren't rules. One recruiter might have a diluted opinion that says that, right? What the hell do they know? They don't have the 20 years experience. How would they know if that prepares you to be a better employee in this role than someone else? How would they know? The only people that would know that is someone who has both 20 years experience in that role and the other thing that you mentioned that you're comparing it against. You know what I'm saying? Right? These are artificial guesses based on stereotypes. Okay, I used to teach this in university. That's all they are, right? For example, when the recruiter says, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? And you give an answer. And they say, oh, I'm sorry, that's not a good answer. Therefore, you're not a fit for this role. Well, where does that come from? That comes from assumptions based on statistical probability, right? They're trying to get to know you without actually getting to know you. So the way they do that is they rely on heuristics and they rely on stereotypes, right? If you know that the majority of people that have been fired from a role before have a 15% greater likelihood of being fired from this job if you were to hire them, right? Then you're going to apply that rule to anyone who says, oh, they were fired from a previous job. Or you're going to assume that they have a 15% chance, a greater chance of not working out, right? Is that true? No, that's simply based on statistics, right? You're making an assumption that this person follows that rule and they are not one of the exceptions, right? So similarly, stuff like this, it's equally invalid, right? The thing is, they have to make some kind of determination. They got hundreds of candidates. You have to narrow that down to a handful, like maybe 6 that you interview, and that you look at seriously. You do background checks and you check references and all that kind of stuff. And you interview them. And so you have to have some criteria to sort of pare it down, right? But this is how they do things at the worker level, where quite frankly, and don't take this the wrong way, but quite frankly, it doesn't really matter to them who they get. If one person doesn't work out, they let them go, they hire another person. It really doesn't matter. It's where you hire people at higher levels where it matters. You put like a vice president that you hired that is bad in charge of a division of a company, in 3 months, that person can make the entire revenue stream for that division evaporate. Not only that, they can drive away all the talented employees, and if that weren't enough, they can ruin the company's reputation with their customers permanently, right? You want to make sure you get the right person for those jobs. How do they do it? Through networking. They're not going to take anyone's word at anything. They want to know for sure who you are, right? At the lower level, you can afford to hire strangers. You take your best guess. Usually it works. If it doesn't, no big deal. You replace them. You know what I mean? So these little rules they come up with, right? They're arbitrary. Frederick says, and anyone looking for a job is not expected to be misleading double standards. What you expect, listen, I agree with you, but the reality is what you expect somebody to be is not reality, right? It's like saying, I went down to buy a used car from the used car dealership, and the salesperson told me this car was a good deal. Well, it turns out it was a lemon. I didn't expect them to be misleading. I'm not saying that, you get what you deserve. I'm not saying that at all. You're absolutely right. They misled you. They're a bunch of clowns for doing that, right? However, if you look at the incentive structure with a little bit of wisdom, you should maybe expect that person to try to mislead you to a degree. It wouldn't be unexpected of them because they have a clear incentive to make you want to do something, and it's to their advantage if you do it. Like, they profit directly if they do, So if you examine the incentive structure, you could have expected it, right? And most people, when you get a bit of wisdom because you've lived in the world and you've been kicked around and knocked around and been taken a couple of times, you sort of wise up to this kind of stuff, right? And you realize that, okay, in certain situations, I can expect people to perhaps exaggerate, perhaps mislead me or attempt to mislead me, to a degree, okay? And like I say on this channel a lot, you have a very complex relationship with an employer. Even when you're in the company, when they hire you and you're an employee, in some ways, they're your ally, right? You're all on the same team. If they succeed, then they have the money to employ you and pay you, right? So you want them to succeed, right? It also makes your life easier. But in other ways, they're your adversary because they made a certain amount of money, and that money can either go to you or it can go to them, right? So if they can convince you that you're only worth a little bit, right, and you will be happy with that amount, that's to their advantage. They pay you that amount, you're happy, and they keep this much that they actually made for themselves, right? So you have opposite incentives in those type of situations, right? So unfortunately, we do encounter a lot of this, and a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, you're it's like a slap in the face. You're encountering the real world head on, sometimes for the first time, and you get taken for a ride. The good thing is that if that does happen to you, most people you're not gonna fall for the same thing twice. You're gonna wise up to these people, and you're gonna learn how to handle it. You handle yourself professionally. You want to help out, you want to contribute, but you're also tuned in to where your incentives diverge from theirs. So you do something that's mutually beneficial. It makes sense for both of you, and you both win. Alex Rosca says, "Hi, Bill. Just saying that my colleague that I've told you who is Razvan is making things too fast, and he waits for me. But the thing I've noticed is that he bothered. Oh, I remember this. His noticed is that he bothered because he is responsible for me. Okay, even though we are close to the target, unfortunately, line leader asked him why not making the whole target hour. Blah, blah, blah. Production machines have screwed up. Okay, that goes on for quite a while." Alex, can you ask your question? Like, if you got a question, like you're giving me paragraph after paragraph of this big long story, just ask your question, okay? I've had about all the backstory I think I can digest, okay, for this. So it's great to see you back, but I'm here to help you out. So just if you would ask something I can help you with, that would be useful. Frederick says, "Now everyone in the chat knows that I have less than 20 years of experience." Oh no! You're welcome. I'm not talking about you. I was never talking about you. I'm talking about the problem you put before me, right? Anyway, hopefully you understand what I was saying, right? These are arbitrary rules. You know what? Listen, Frederick, maybe you know this already, in which case, congratulations, you're awesome. But if you don't, let's just walk through this very quickly. Like, imagine you have an employee that has 20 years experience, right? And quite frankly, they're not a very good employee, right? They have a bad attitude. They put in as little as they possibly can to ensure that, just ensure they do just as much to ensure they don't get fired, but as little as they can to maintain their job. Bad employee, right? But they've been there 20 years. You have someone like them working along next to another employee, a coworker of theirs who's been there 5 years, but is smarter, is actually interested in learning this job. They have a much better attitude. They can communicate more professionally and more pleasantly with others. They can collaborate. They're a pleasure to deal with. And they know their stuff. They've only been there 5 years, but they know more than the person who's been there 20 years. Because they value it and they're enthusiastic about it. It's like, I'm sure we can all think of some example like that we've seen with our own eyes, right? Just because someone's been there 20 years, what does that matter? It doesn't matter about anything. The only reason why someone would care about a metric like that is because they don't want to look deeper into who the person is. They want to make a snap decision very quickly, go or no go, right, with this person, yay or nay. Give me some basic facts about them. Okay, this one is this, that one's that, put them together. Okay, we pick this, right? But it's in a situation where it doesn't really matter. Okay, a lot of low-level jobs are like that. They take their best guess and then, whatever. Let's see what we get, right? as evidenced by the fact that recruiter is an entry-level job. Did you guys know that? Some people did, I'm sure. Some people didn't. You know, you don't need to have worked at a company for 30 years, you know, and proven it through merit and accomplishments and a great track record for them to put you in charge of hiring. You know, usually it's an entry-level job, right? Because they're comparing people on superficial crap like this. That's quite ineffective. And they've done a lot of data-driven studies in academia over the years that have confirmed this. You know, so the question is, why do they still hire people using methods like this? Simple. It's because they don't have anything else that's really more effective for this small amount of effort that they're willing to put in. Right? It's a strategic decision, and different employers make that decision differently, right? But this is tied directly to HR strategy, which is tied directly to high-level business strategy, you know? And it's stuff at the low level. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to make that much sense. Okay, Alex is saying, wouldn't it still be managing emotions? Wouldn't be still managing his emotions for Rajman, who's age 25, try to stay calm, but he spreads a lot of emotion. Affects me too. I think didn't we talk about this last time, Alex? I think I was talking about how to communicate properly. So I believe I kind of answered that already last time. Me, who I am calm, not to mention that he makes bad jokes, so I don't like jokes, working with colleagues who divert like me. Listen, okay, I want to remind you, Alex, that maybe this is helpful for you in this situation. You have control over yourself. You do not have control over other people, right? That's self-evident, right? Sometimes we forget that. However, you can't control the other person, but you can control how you respond to whatever they do. You understand, right? So, for example, like, you know, you're complaining about this person, they're emotional, they make bad jokes. I don't know if that means like offensive jokes or just literally bad jokes that you're annoying. It's like a groaner or something, you know. Why did the chicken cross the road? Because he wasn't the company's expert. You know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, thunderous applause. You know what I mean? But you do have control over how you respond to it, okay? So usually, like I believe I explained last time, if they're doing something that's a big problem for you, you need to address it with them. You need to attempt to address it with them directly first. It might be awkward. You might be raising an issue with somebody who's more senior than you, who might be your supervisor, you know, whatever. But you have to address it with them. You have to at least make the attempt once, you know, because then if you escalate it and go over their head, you know, it's like, if you do that without like having attempted to address it with them, that's usually not going to go well, right? So knowing how to communicate, knowing, like I already went into this stuff last time, being able to just express yourself and say, listen, you know, you do it like one-on-one, you do it in private, you say, listen, you know, I've noticed that, you know, you talk about this and you talk about that and it's funny, you know, blah, blah. But, you know, in all honesty, sometimes it goes a bit far. It makes me feel kind of annoyed, you know, I'm trying to do my work, and from my perspective, I'm trying to do my work and you keep talking to me or you keep doing this, you know, I'm hoping that maybe, you know, would it be okay if you could just back off, or you could stop doing this or whatever, right? And then you see what they say. If they kind of have a good response, great, it can end there. If they don't, then you say, listen, like, okay, I understand, you know, that you feel pretty strongly, but listen, just so you know, this is a big issue for me, and I'd like to get it resolved with you, and then, you know, it's over. But if I can't get it resolved with you, I would need to pursue it through other channels, you know, that kind of thing, right? And then you escalate it. You take it either to the boss or to HR or whatever, right? So it's just a matter of understanding how to do that. That's what I think you need to do here, by the sound of things. Learning phase, and I get help. Okay. Frederick, you explained so well that reality is not always what you might wish for, that you need to think one step beyond. I understand so well when you take a step beyond my thoughts. Okay, well, that's good. It sounds like you're into what I'm saying. Listen, Frederick, this has just been kind of my life's journey. When I started out in my like early 20s, I was just naive as hell. I didn't know how anything worked. And you take things at face value. And for me personally, I felt that, you would come out of the school system, and what do you do in school? You conform, right? They got a rule for everything. You just have to sort of coast through. They're going to tell you what happens next, what you need to do, and how to do it all the time, right? So you don't have to really think. You don't have to go and investigate and find out how stuff works. You're just told how it works, and then you're told what you need to do, right? And then that comes to an end at some point. And then, like I said earlier, it's like the real world hits you like a slap in the face. All of a sudden, there's nobody there telling you like how things work, what you need to do, right? What's the best way of doing something? You're just left alone to figure it out for yourself, right? That's a lot of people's experience to varying degrees, right? Some version of that. And when you start out, you get taken for a ride. You get burned. You encounter some bad people that lie to you. They exploit you. You might get a couple of jobs back when you're younger and you get exploited, You get lied to. You're given misinformation. You're given false information that you think is accurate. So you act on it and you can't understand it because things aren't working out the way you would expect, right? Usually when you see that, it's because you've made an incorrect assumption, or you've been going on misinformation. Something you believe is true is actually false. So that's usually a sign, a signal that that's the case, right? So, now I don't know about you guys. Maybe some of you guys have this too. I had a bit of a rebellious streak when I was young, and when people would tell me stuff, I wouldn't always accept it at face value. So I'd question. I'd say, well, they would tell you I remember like things like, you'd learn like literature or whatever in school. They teach you like Shakespeare and stuff. And it's like, they would say, this means that when Shakespeare says this, it's because he means this. And I'd be like, well, that doesn't seem like that to me. Why do you say that? Prove that to me. Because I think he's not saying that at all. I think he's saying something else, whatever stupid thing, right? And I just had that attitude. And when I got out of like school in my early 20s, I found that a lot of people lie to you, and a lot of people tell you stuff to make it look like they know what's going on and they have all the authority, and they're the expert when they're really not, They're just trying to pull the wool over your eyes. You know what I mean? And when you go through job search at that age and they tell you, okay, you got to apply for a job, and then recruiters tell you certain things and you believe them. For a start, they might tell you, okay, we'll get back to you. You ever heard that one? Right? What do? That's usually a sign that they're never going to get back to you ever again, right? But when you're young, you don't know this. You were never told this. When they say, I'll get back to you, that's code for, I don't want to talk to you anymore, and I don't want to answer you right now, and I probably won't get back to you, right? If they give you specifics, like I'll get back to you Tuesday at 3, then maybe they might actually get back to you. But usually they're not going to, right? They never say no, or usually, like hardly ever say no. If the answer is no, you didn't get the job, you didn't pass the interview. Do they ever tell you no? Of course not. They say, well, we're still thinking about it, right? Or some euphemistic kind of kiss off, right? So it begins with that. It begins with like recognizing that, like, okay, just because someone says it doesn't mean that it's true. What matters is your actions, not your words, right? You can say whatever, but what matters is what you do, right? So, like it starts with those kinds of ideas and it goes from there, right? Mohammed says, good evening, Bill. Good evening, Mohammed. Thank you for being here. Jason says, my problem is that I get interviews and looks and either get ghosted or I don't get the offer. I'm a silver medal candidate. How can I stop this trend? I don't understand what a silver medal candidate is. Listen, it can be very frustrating, Jason, but listen, I could be wrong because all I'm going on is this sentence you've written, these 2 sentences you've written me. That's all I'm going on, right? But what I'm getting from this, and don't bite my head off for this, is I'm getting what you're thinking is that because I have this thing, silver medal, whatever, they should be hiring me. I'm clearly good, therefore they should hire me. And if they're not hiring me, something fishy is going on. They're keeping me back. It's unfair. It's, whatever. First of all, listen, I'm not sure what the silver medal thing is, okay? And I don't know how that applies to what job you have applied for, where this happened to you, okay? But I don't care if you got a PhD. I don't care if you've won an Olympic gold medal. I don't care if you've discovered the cure for cancer. You're not entitled to a job, Why? Well, because people have free will, and an employer can hire whoever they want, right? It's their decision. In the same way that you have the freedom to quit whatever job you want. You don't have to check in with your employer if it's okay for you to quit. If you want to quit, you can damn well up and quit. That's your right, You have the free will to do that. And conversely, employers, they're giving their own money to hire people, right? It doesn't belong to the public. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to that company. That's a company that's owned by some people, some individuals. And they've all decided that, we're going to hire someone. We're going to give our money to whoever person we decide to hire. They have the perfect right to hire whoever they want. No one is entitled to a job. Now, if they decide, okay, I hire this person because, my God, they've got a big nose. And I like people with big nose. A big nose to me suggests a strong personality. I've met a lot of people with big noses when I was 5 years old, and they had all strong personalities. So damn it, I'm convinced that that's the real sign of a strong personality and therefore a great employee if they got a big nose. So I'm going to hire an entire company's worth of people with amazingly large noses, because that's the key to success, right? That might be idiotic, but they have the freedom to do that because they're playing with their own money. Now, it gets more complicated when you're talking about government stuff because it's not really their money, but that's a fraction of employers out there. I'm talking about the private sector, okay? If these people are unsuccessful and they squander their money and they make poor decisions so that they don't make any money, they go bankrupt, they lose their jobs. So they lose if they don't do this right. And conversely, they have the right to hire who they want. So that all sounds very negative, doesn't it? That sounds like, I'm really not helping. But here's the deal. I don't care what they've been smoking to figure that, a person with a big nose means a great employee. But whatever their philosophy is on what they think is a good person, that they should hire, figure out what that is. And then you be that to them. You show up with that. You show up at that interview with a fake plastic nose, and you get the job. Whatever the hell it takes, right? Obviously, this is a ridiculous example, but do you understand my point? It's there's no rules about this. People can hire whom they want, just like there's no rules about what job you're allowed to quit and what you're not if it's, just like a private company and you're a citizen of that country and you have all the rights, that you have to in a free country. If you're in a free country, you have the right to quit whatever job you want, right? So, you know what I mean? It's not about I deserve a job and if I don't get it, it must be unfair. It's about, certainly in a private company, the idea is these people can hire who they want and they make stupid decisions. Let me tell you, holy crap. I have seen some people make the most idiotic decisions about who to hire. And it had nothing to do with me. I was an observer or whatever, so whatever. I can't really say anything, but like, my God, really? You know? And usually it's the beginning of the end when they think like that. Anyway, Jason, you're awesome. You're going to do well, okay? But just don't think, if that is how you're thinking, if it is, don't think like that. Instead, turn it on its head. Think like, what do these people value? Okay? How can I convince them I have it, right? And then I'll get hired. Even if it's like an idiotic thing, even if it's all cosmetic and it doesn't mean anything, like the majority of a lot of job interviews, right? People get hired on, you know, one of the big factors is, do you agree with the boss? You know, it's not about merit. It's not about like who's better than whom. It's just silly things like that. Whatever it is, find out what it is and you do it. Or the thing that most people do is they just say like, look, I'm not prepared to play that game. Most people aren't playing that game. I don't give a rat's ass about having a big nose. That's stupid. So I'm just going to go somewhere else where they don't have their head up their ass and they make intelligent hiring decisions. And I'm going to be, you know, a really promising candidate. And sooner or later, a good employer is going to see me and they're going to hire me. Anyway, I'm not sure how helpful that was, but I wish you the best of luck, Jason. You're awesome. Eddie says, I've been in the same line of work for 25 years and have also no actual interviews during that time. I've just shifted through hiring managers to hiring managers, avoiding the HR person completely. Yeah, congratulations. That's more typical than you think. That's usually how it goes for people. So I've been sort of shielded from reality in a way, and I've been something of a Pollyanna. So I'm getting a little epiphanies from your answers to everyone's questions. Listen, Eddie, you know, a natural progression is that when we're younger, we apply for posted jobs. You don't know anyone at the company. You don't know how to reach out to a company. You don't understand a lot of that stuff. So that's how you kind of do it when you're younger. By the time you're mid or late career, you're maybe, if you do change jobs, you're changing jobs because you have connections. You're changing jobs because you can reach out to people, deal with people. You know, something that I learned early on is that, listen, I'm in no way saying anything political. It may sound political, but it's not political. I don't want to talk about politics. But like, if you're in a free country, okay, where you have the right to work where you want, you're not dictated to, you must work here and you can't quit, like you're a prisoner or something. But, you know, certainly in the West, you know, and a lot of other countries in the world, you have the right to talk to whomever you want. Right? There's nothing in the law that says you can't talk to that person. Right? Okay? So imagine, okay, let's imagine, and this is probably true, by the way, that there is an employer that hires people with your skills, okay, and your background and all the rest of it. They hire people like you within, say, 10 blocks of where you live. Okay? Now, let's imagine the person in charge of that employer, whether it's a CEO or an owner, you know, if it's like, it could be government. I don't like to talk about government. It's a bit more complicated, but just the private sector. It's the company is either owned by an individual or it's run by an individual. You know, that person that's in charge of that company, right? They're 10 blocks from where you live. They do employ people that have similar skill sets to what you have. So it's possible that you could end up working there, right? You could contribute to that business, right? Now, the person that is running that company, you have the perfect right to go talk to them. Okay? It doesn't take a lot to discover who that person is, you know, first of all, it doesn't take a lot to discover this employer using things like Google Maps. Then it doesn't take much to discover who that individual is that runs that employer using things like LinkedIn. And then it's not that hard to approach them, also using things like LinkedIn, okay? You have the perfect right to communicate with them. Now, they also have rights. They have the right to not respond to you if they don't want to, but there's nothing that says you can't talk to them, right? You know, so this is something that I have found teaching younger people in their 20s in university and stuff, teaching them about networking and about this kind of stuff. And it's like, almost to a person, a lot of young people, they figure like at that age, they're like, I can't talk to someone like that. Well, why not? Now I understand if you don't know what to say, you don't know how to approach them, but like even the idea that they could or should do this is abhorrent to them. It's like anathema. It's like, I couldn't talk to them. I don't have the right to talk to them. They would like laugh me out of their office or laugh me, they'd delete my email or whatever before they even read it. It's like, no. Yeah, some of them would, right? Just like people. Some of them do one thing, some of them do another. But a lot of them won't, Now, if you have no idea how to talk to somebody, that's going to be a big problem, right? And when I say talk, I mean communicate. Like you could talk to them face to face, but what I'm suggesting, which is more likely, especially for introverts, is you send them a message of some kind, like a DM or a note or an email or whatever, right? And if you don't know how to start talking to them in a way that they would want to actually read the rest of it, that's going to be a big problem, right? There are people that are very, very good at this kind of thing. They're called salespeople, who understand some of these basic principles, right? And they can write a message to someone they don't know in such a way that person will actually want to respond, right? But my point is, you can do all this. It's purely a matter of skill. And thanks to social networking, you can do a lot of this remotely, right? And imagine what that would look like when you're an employee that's had a career of 20 years, maybe even 30 years, and you're wanting to switch jobs. You've seen that industry from inside that company. You're known for being on the inside of that company. You have connections to a lot of people at a lot of other companies, right? You're coming from a position of authority. It's skills like that. That's how people get jobs towards the middle or end of their career, right? It's much more promising. It's also the way to level the playing field. If you're worried about a career gap, if you're worried about changing careers, if you're worried about ageism, if you're worried about any number of other things that are an issue when you go through recruiters, reaching out to people is the blanket solution for all of those, right? Because if you meet someone that's kind of like-minded, but they're maybe one level up or two levels up or more, and they like you because you and them are quite similar, it cancels out a lot of other kind of sins, That's how people get jobs towards the end of their career, generally speaking. And there's a reason for that. Jason says, basically, I'm always the runner-up. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jason, that sucks. I remember that feeling myself. It's hard to go up against like 700 or 800 candidates that apply for posted jobs, get put on like a level playing field with all of them, and beat them all hands down. It's just hard, And I'm a generalist. I've worked across 5 industries. The way you win at that game is you're a specialist. You do customer service. You're going for a customer service job. You've worked 25 years in customer service in all different areas of customer service, right? Everything you've done has served your career in customer service in some way, right? You got 25 years in customer service. You're always going to win out against somebody who has 5 years in customer service, no matter what you do, right? No matter what that person with 5 years experience in customer service does. They could have won a Nobel Prize. They could have walked on the moon. Doesn't matter because they only got 5 years of customer experience. They're going up against people with 25 years, It's tough. On a level playing field. But you know what? The way you win is you become the only person that showed up for the job. The only person that didn't go in the front door with everyone else. You went around, right? In some way. Okay, that's what I've found. Right? Because you're not hired on the basis that, your resume beat everyone else's when, compared side by side. You win the job on the basis that you're the only person that they've met They've seen how awesome you are, how professional you are, how persuasive you are, how you get along with them. They see that you know your stuff. And they see that you want the job, as evidenced by the fact that you're the only one that showed up. Everybody else was just a resume on the table. They haven't even met them. They're all strangers, but they met you. Who would you hire? That's how you get around this stuff, right? This system of posted jobs going through recruiters is by far not the way most people get hired, right? And if you don't believe me, go look it up. Go do your own research. I'm wanting to get you to do that, okay? That's the steps for learning about the world, learning how things are actually done. And that way you're set up to sort of hack it a little, You don't do anything illegal. You don't do anything underhanded. You just don't follow the official process. You take shortcuts in a good way, not in an underhanded way, in a good way, right? Listen, how would you respond if somebody contacted you on LinkedIn? Turns out there's someone in your hometown and they're younger than you. And they've studied or gotten training in an area that's very similar to yours. And they say to you, listen, I see from your LinkedIn profile that you have this education and this experience, and I see that you are in this job. Now listen, I am just coming out of school now. I haven't had a career job, but I aspire to be in a position similar to what you have now. I hope to work up to that someday. And I would love to sit down and ask you a few questions about the path you took, your career, what you do in your job, how you got there. What do you think, the most important thing is for someone who wants to work in this area? I would love to sit down and just, have you teach me. Just ask you a few questions. If you could spare half an hour of your time, I'd really appreciate it. Let me know a date, time, and place that's convenient for you, and I'll be there. Now, what would your response be for something like that? Would you say, no, who are you? How do you get this number? If, or they sent it to you on LinkedIn or an email or something like that. Most people would kind of feel flattered. They'd say, sure, yeah, I got half an hour, maybe on next Tuesday. If you can meet me here, at this time, sure, yeah, I'll talk to you. It's flattering, right? There's nothing that says you can't do that, right? And that's a lot of the basics of how introverts can network very effectively, right? You know what I mean? Now think of a job. Think if that person is in a position, you're not talking about a worker, but maybe a supervisor or something. One of the things they have to do is in a couple of weeks, they got to fill a position, right? Or they've been asked to sit in on some job interviews at their workplace for a position where they're hiring for someone in their department. And that person is going to be supervised by this person, right? So they have kind of a say, right? So imagine if that's the person that this young person is talking to, right? So there might even be a job at the end. Now you meet this young person. They're professional, they're persuasive, they seem genuinely interested. They don't ask a bunch of crazy, idiotic questions. They ask very intelligent questions, that shows that they're genuinely interested, they're asking the right things, and you get a good vibe from them. And you both get along really well. Would you not put in a good word for them at that interview? Say hey, I don't know if this is all closed yet, but I might have a person if I can submit a resume. I just met them. They seem to be really good. They're a student and they're graduating, and I've met them and they look like they'd be pretty good for this, You know what I mean? That's how these things work. Okay. So this is all outside of the official hiring process. And you know what? In some organizations, very formal organizations, they do have an official hiring process that, the very minority of these companies, they really stick to in absolute terms. Most of them, it's very flexible. A mid-level manager wants to hire this person. Okay. Hey, fine. You get to decide that. We're going to do our background checks and, all that, but assuming they check out, sure. That's how it works in most places. where did I leave off here? Sorry, I apologize for going off on these weird tangents. Okay, this has moved on me here. So we were talking to Jason. Jason says basically I'm the runner-up. Eddie DeVere said some pretty complimentary things. Thank you, Eddie. If you guys want to learn more about this, you want to learn how it works, check out this course. This is where I don't do one-on-one consulting with people for this kind of stuff, but I did put it into the course. It's a much better bang for the buck. It walks you all through this stuff. If you want a little bit of a preview, there are some videos I've linked in the description box under this live stream, some resources I put there that are like links to my own videos. One's called Hidden Job Market. Okay, you could check that out. Another one that's much more directly related to this stuff I was just kind of going into about reaching out to people and stuff. There's a video where I show you what that looks like. It's called How Successful People Get Jobs. Okay, so follow that link. I'm not trying to get you to leave, but there's a video link to that under, if you're interested in seeing a bit more of that, and if you want to learn how the whole thing works, check out that course right here. Link also in the description box below. I am prospering, I'm grateful, and I receive. That's a good handle. It says, should I disclose in interviews that I was recovering from a brain injury? I haven't worked in a few years. Yes and no. You like that answer? I wouldn't lead with it. I wouldn't volunteer it. But if they ask you directly, then I would say it, and I wouldn't have an issue with it. Okay? So that's what I would say. Like, you will disclose it if it comes to that, but I wouldn't announce it to them for no reason. Just, because unless they're really probing you for it, it will count against you, usually. All things being equal. Okay? It shouldn't, but I would not be surprised to learn that it does in a lot of situations. Not every situation, but a lot of situations. So I would not volunteer it, but I wouldn't have an issue with disclosing it if people really zeroed in and prompted you for it. Now, depending on where you live, what country you're in, all this kind of stuff, probing people about their medical background and stuff is kind of a gray area. So make sure you're familiar with the local labor laws wherever you are in your region. That sort of explain what you're required to disclose and what you're not. I would just make sure you're familiar with those in a job interview. Jason Elliott, I'm not thinking I'm entitled. I'm just saying how I could get over the hump. Okay, good. Yeah. Listen, I didn't know. I was just sort of covering my bases here. But, yeah, learn how to get hired. I know that's so unhelpful, but it's like there's a lot to it. It's not simply just submitting resumes, going to job interviews, answering standard questions. That's a part of it, but there's a lot more to it, right? Essentially, I hate to say it, but you're selling yourself, right? It's the sales process, and you're selling a product, which is yourself. You're saying, you need to forget all those other people you were talking to and hire me. And here's why. Right? That's essentially what you're saying. You're trying to persuade people. So it's a matter of sales. It's a matter of persuasion. It's a matter of networking. You know what I mean? This is reality. Now, listen, I've never said this before. This is probably going to come out totally wrong. But it's I've been trying to explain this to especially younger people for a very long time, and I find it's a real uphill battle. A lot of people just don't believe that you could do this, right? At the same time, I don't know if you guys watch movies or TV shows. I don't know if anyone watches that stuff anymore. It's not been good in the last few years, but there's a lot of movies out there. And I mean, I don't know, you guys seen The Wolf of Wall Street? That's the one that for some reason leaps to mind. But like, you know, we're talking about hiring and stuff like that. You see examples of this in movies. Now, it's fiction, you know, or it's some kind of, what do you call it? Like adaptation of somebody's idealized account of something, you know, so whatever, you take it with a grain of salt. But you see this kind of crap in movies all the time, right? You see The Wolf of Wall Street. There's like two main characters. There's Leonardo DiCaprio and there's the fat guy, the funny fat guy, right? Whatever his name was. And, you know, his character, how he gets the job to work with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? It's basically like, you know, they just meet up and say, hey, you know, some kind of meeting, an encounter, a conversation, and bam, next thing you know, he's working for him, right? Now, that's fiction, that's idealized, but the principle is quite sound, you know? You know, if someone's looking for something, and good companies are always looking for good people that are enthusiastic and they're talented, right? Which means they're always looking for you. Why don't they hire you? Because you're not the one stepping out to meet them. You're going in with the crowd, right? If you knew how to reach out to them directly, just you, in some way, they'd be taking a good look at you. And the fact that you're even doing that already signals a bunch of awesome things about you. Like, namely, you know, they always ask, like, why do you want to work here? You know, that kind of stuff. They're checking for genuine interest in doing the job. Not that you need to get paid, but that you want to do this job, right? That's what that question is about. Why do you want to work here? It's not about like, duh, I need a job. No, it's about why do you want to work here? You can work anywhere. Why would you want to work here? What's so special about us that makes you want to come and talk to us, right? That's what they're asking. They're trying to gauge genuine interest. That's what that question is for, right? Now, when you reach out to them directly, that's not easy to do. Imagine if you had to physically go down there. You know, you don't have to, but if you did, that shows you're prepared to go to even greater lengths. So you're not going to do that for every job under the sun. You're only going to do that to jobs you actually want to work for, you know? So you signal things that elevates yourself above all the other candidates because none of them did that, just you. Yeah, Jason, you're awesome. Best of luck. The mighty Fifi. There's a name. And the incredible, right? That's got to be your handle. How do you spell that? Let me know if you, like these names that are unpronounceable, like, you know, that's your name. How do you spell that? Let me know. The mighty Fifi says, I have a big interview for the job on Wednesday. Do you have any recommendations for a question I should ask in the interview? Oh my God. You are on the level, Fifi. I am doing videos, like I used to do videos that were different from a live stream when my channel started, like it was me on a gray background. I want to get into doing those again. The first script that I'm working on is that exact question. Okay. Ask 3 to 4 questions. The last question you ask should always be, where do we go from here? Or some variant of it, right? Okay. You know, there's a bunch of questions you could ask. It's not that hard to think of questions. But what you got to remember is that the questions in the interview, when they ask you, do you have any questions for us? It seems like you should ask questions that you genuinely want the answers to. That's what it seems like. You take it literally. You shouldn't. You see, that question is a performance, right? The problem is you get some candidates asking questions that are awkward for the recruiter to answer, right? They say like, you know, well, if you were the CEO of this company, what would you change about it because it's not working? You know, and they think they're so clever in asking these probing questions, you know, and they're not. It just makes the recruiter feel awkward and therefore they have less of a good vibe about you. You're the candidate that made me feel awkward. I don't appreciate that, right? You know? So it's not about asking questions that, you know, you care about the answer to. It's about how you're perceived by what you ask. Okay, it's a performance, just like every other part of the job interview. You're trying to make a good impression. And this question, do you have any questions for us? It's your last chance to make a good impression at that interview. Okay? So what does the recruiter care about? They're looking for someone who can do the job. They're also looking for someone who shows genuine interest in the job. Like they're genuinely interested in this job, right? So you can ask questions that signal those things, right? If you can tell them the hardest part of doing the job before they mention it, that signals you know how to do the job, right? So if you ask a question like, what would be the hardest part of doing this job? Would it be this? What would you expect me to learn in the first 30 days? What would be the most, questions like that. The third thing that recruiters look for is they're looking for a candidate that's not going to be any trouble, that's going to get along with everyone, that's not going to rock the boat, that's going to work well with other people, right? So how can you signal that that's you? You could ask questions like, about team dynamics, about team communication, things like this. You would ask questions like, what would be a good question? How do people in this department communicate with each other, or how do they get along with each other? How do they work together? Something like that, right? That shows you're tuned into that stuff. You care about getting along. You care about communicating well with others and getting along with others. So the fact that your head's there, they think, okay, this person cares about that, which that's good, because we want someone who's going to care about getting along with everyone and fitting in and working with other people, right? So like that's those are the questions you ask. Like there's a million things you could ask, but to really zero in the ones that would make the best impression is you ask about, like I said, to show that you do the job. You could ask about, what's the most important aspect of this job, or the hardest, the part that's going to be the biggest challenge for the candidate that you hire. What would that be? Would it be this? That would signal that. In terms of showing that you can get along with people, you would ask a question along the lines of, how do people here collaborate? How do they work together? What do the winning employees do to collaborate with others here? Something like that. To show that you have genuine interest in the job, that you care about doing this job. You don't ask so what are the benefits? You don't ask stuff that's self-serving to you. You ask to show that you're interested. You would say well, if I was to start in this job, what would be the first thing you want to see me accomplish, in the first 30 days? What would be the most critical thing that I should accomplish first in this job? You're thinking ahead. You're thinking ahead to when you're doing it because you want it, So questions like that, those are good questions to ask, because not because you're going to get all kinds of really cool, useful information, but because it signals to them that you're the person that has the things that they're looking for. Okay? That's kind of what's going on in that question. So those three questions that address those three areas, and then the fourth one is some variant of, so where do we go from here? What's the next steps? That shows you're interested, and that might give you something useful to know what's going to happen in, with this process, right? So you know if you need to follow up or you're going to hear from them or whatever, right? But it's about what you signal. So hopefully that makes sense. That's what I would say. And that was, where was that? Oh, okay, right on. Oh, no, there it is. I thought the question had been removed or something. That was the mighty Fifi. So hopefully that makes sense. Star Fury 1984 says, so how do you write messages, cover letters to bosses in a way that makes them want to read and respond to them? Well, you don't write cover letters, that's for damn sure. This is something different. This is called networking. Oh, it continues. I try to become proactive and uncover the hidden job market, and it's challenging as an introvert. Many ghost you, so you get no feedback at all, which makes getting better at this difficult. Yeah, it's exactly like the posted job market. You're absolutely correct. How many times do you send out an application and you don't get an interview? A lot, right? This is exactly the same. The only difference is that the odds of hearing back are better, right? But you're right, it's a numbers game. It works exactly the same thing. Don't send one message and then just sit back and wait for the call, right? It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. You send it out to many people, just like you would blast out job applications, right? And it's a numbers game. You're going to get a ratio of people that respond and that don't. So what is your ratio for hearing back from sending in a job application? 1%, 5%, 0.5%. Some people are going to have different ratios, right? It depends on how effective your materials are, the appropriateness of the jobs you're applying to, your methods, right? It's the state of the economy. Whether the butterfly is flapping its wings in Brazil, it's going to depend on a lot of things, right? But you're going to get like a sort of ratio. It might be 1%, 5%. So that means that if you apply for, let's say 1,000 jobs, I don't know if you apply for that many, but if you apply for 1,000 jobs, how many interviews do you get? Do you get 1? Do you get 10? Do you get 50? Right? You know what I mean? You're going to get that. Now, of the interviews you go to, how many offers do you get? Right? It's like a 10% ratio, something like that. Usually you would probably have much less data for that one, right? But it's a similar idea, when you're doing direct outreach, because what you're essentially doing is you're using the sales method. It's a numbers game, right? You might blast out 100 messages. Of those messages, depending on what you're going for, I don't know what the message is. Like, it depends what you're asking for. Some people ask for an informational interview. Other people, they say, I'm looking for a job, hire me. Whatever it is that you're asking for, what's the ratio? Do you get a response from 30%, from 5%, Now, when I was building my consulting business, I employed this method. I used LinkedIn. This was like 5 years ago or whatever. And my ratio, and I say this in my course, by the way, this is where I put all the details of how to do all this stuff. It was like, I think what I did is I sent out notes that was accompanied by a connection request on LinkedIn. So, you want to friend somebody or whatever, you send the connection request and you can attach a note to it, right? So I attached my note and I got something like and this went exclusively to CEOs of companies that I didn't know. So I didn't know these people, they didn't know me, but they were all CEOs. And I got a 30% response rate for the connection request. Now, of the people that, connected with me, I then went and reached out to them requesting for informational interviews. Okay. And I got something like, I think it was 20%. The only reason I remember this is because I said it in the course. It was like 20%, right? So if you went to, say, 100 people, you sent out this template message to 100 people, okay? 30% accepted your connection request. Of those 30, you sent a second message saying, let's talk, or, let's have an informational interview, whatever it was. And I got a 20% response rate. So what's 20% of 30? 6? So that would be 6 informational interviews for 100 initial targets, right? Now you go to way more than 100, right? You can go to 1,000, right? Easily. You could do 100 in a day. You're just sending out a sort of template message or connection request, where you're changing the name, but essentially it's a template email. So or message. So it's a numbers game. That's my point. So yes, you're not going to hear back from the majority of people, but you hear back from some. That's how posted jobs work. That's how this works. You put out a lot of leads, or whatever you want to call them, targets. You could call them different things. Prospects, whatever, and you get back, a sort of subset of those, right? So you start with a very big number, and then it comes down like this, right? Of the informational interviews that I did, how many became like clients, like long-term clients, like another 10%, something like that. But you only need a handful of those to keep for you to be set, just like you only need one job offer. So you might apply for 1,000 jobs. You get, I don't know, 5 to 10 interviews, something like that, whatever, somewhere in there, depending, and then one offer, right? It's a funnel, very similar to the marketing funnel. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Alex, can AI take all jobs? As people say in my context, I'm already working with robotic arms. I've considered that AI still needs operator even now. Listen, I can't answer that for your specific job. I have absolutely no idea. But across the board, it's no. The answer is no. It'll take some jobs, like everything does, right? But, it's the same thing over and over again. And I'll just say this very quickly so I can move on to other questions. But it's the same thing over. I mean, I'm old. I've lived through a lot of changes. I mean, I remember doing business before the internet. You know what I mean? And completely different. And then what happened when, say, the internet came out? Well, it's the same pattern we see with AI coming out. Most people ignore it. They pretend it doesn't exist right up to the point where they can't pretend anymore because it's obvious it's here and it's already changing pretty much everything, right? So then they can't ignore it anymore. So what do? They freak out. They go, oh my God, this is the end of the world. This is going to be the end of everything, right? Nobody will have a job. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that in my lifetime. Nobody will have a job. This will be the end of the world. It'll destroy everything. Life will never be the same again, blah, 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 right? Well, what happens? What happens is what always happens. It changes some things, but mostly life goes on, That's what's called change, That's what's called progress. Can you imagine the change that happened when people went from horses and carriages to an automobile? You know what I mean? Like all the people that lost their jobs, all the people that took care of horses and fed the horses and the veterinarians and, you know what I mean? Yeah, that's how it goes, So you see how things are coming and, if you can, you try and hedge kind of your bets. You maybe go back to school, I don't know, brush up on your skills, start looking for other jobs, whatever. Right? So if you really feel that this is going to affect you and it's starting to happen, not because of what some person near you starts babbling about, like just rumors flying, but like actual real evidence. Have they laid anyone off? In your company or in your role, have other companies that employ people that do what you do, have they started laying you off and replacing you with robots or AI or whatever you're concerned about? Has that happened yet? Like, not just like, oh, they might, but like actual evidence, You know what I mean? These things tend to take more time than people think. That's the thing about technology. What was it that Bill Gates used to say? He was saying like people they overestimate what can happen in 1 or 2 years, but they underestimate what can happen in 10 years. And I agree with that. This is the future. This is going to change a lot of things. Is it going to happen overnight? No. But it is coming in. It is going to change things. But in the end, it won't be the end of the world. Nothing ever is. It's just yet another tool that we use. Some people will have to move into different roles. But most people, they'll go on. They might have to learn some new skills, which is what we're seeing. But, it's not the end of the world, right? What generally helps is to embrace it, to recognize early on that, this that we're seeing, this thing coming in, this is going to be normal for like the rest of my life or whatever, your life. This is going to be normal. This is the new normal. In 5 years, everybody will just accept this. It won't even be a thing because it's just a thing. It's just everywhere. It's ubiquitous, you know? So convince yourself of that and then ask yourself, what do I need to do? Do I need to learn it? Do I need to embrace it? You know what I mean? That would be my take. I'm not some kind of technology commentator or anything, but you did ask me the question, so that's what I would say. With regard to jobs, everybody is very alarmist all the time. I remember when the internet came in, computers came in and that was a big enough shift. Then the internet came in. I remember it was an article in the newspaper in like my hometown, and it was like how some religious person had predicted the end of the world. They'd predicted the devil had come down into the world in the form of the internet. A box connected to other boxes. That was the devil. And we laugh. We go, right? Those people were so stupid, and then we sip our martini. It's like, we're that person now, by the way. And the future generation, they're laughing at us. All of you and me, they're laughing at all of us as they chink their martini glasses that are made out of chrome in the future, because that's the style that will take over in 2040. I'm sorry, where did I leave off here? The hell am I talking about? Okay, that was Alex. Mehmet says, had a first round interview with a hiring manager. She asked my salary expectations and such in 10 minutes. The interview was finished. Second round is with the senior executives. What questions I should expect? Well, yeah, that's like a screening interview. It's a very superficial thing. And yeah, they check for basic go, no go things like how much money do you need? And, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like stuff like that. Are you actually interested? So they will probably ask you some version of like all the standard job interview questions because they haven't given you a real interview yet. You've just had a screening interview. So your first one is going to be your first real interview. They will ask you, there's about 10 standard job interview questions, and then there's behavioral questions. I've done videos on how to answer all those, so you can check them out on my channel, right? Behavioral interview questions are pretty damn important. So make sure you know what you're doing there. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Get Hired. It's the playlist that has all the videos in it that I've done that have like millions of views. Go watch that playlist, and that should answer a lot of what you're going to be asked. Just playing the odds. Jason Elliott, I did write a short note on my experience to one job I applied to on Indeed, and I've been having a dialogue with them today. Okay, that's good. That's good. But there's a difference between talking to a recruiter who's going through the official company hiring process and talking to a hiring manager who's just a boss, who's a manager at the company. Usually at a level where they can hire someone, presumably that has your skills, right? That's an unofficial thing. It's an impromptu thing. That's completely different. All things being equal, I would shoot for that, okay? And you don't do that by following official processes. Instead, that's where you go outside the rules. You just contact someone at the company, Anyway, there's a lot to it. I put it all into that course. I have to put it into a course because I can't just explain it all in 5 minutes. It just doesn't work. Even in an hour, I couldn't explain it all to someone who's never done anything like this. There's a lot of principles all at the same time, right? It's like explaining the hiring process to an 18-year-old that's never had a job in their life. You explain all the rules, you think like, I've covered it. And then it turns out they show up to the first job interview in sweatpants and a t-shirt with food stains down the front. And you're like, because you didn't actually cover that. You didn't say like, when you go to a job interview, you have to look professional. What is professional? Professional means this. You didn't actually say that, right? So they make mistakes of that nature, right? Teaching networking to people is like that. You just can't explain it in a very short amount of time in a way that they can just replicate. There's a lot of principles all stacked on top of each other that all apply at the same time. And you have to, it's like a link in a chain. You have to get them all right or it just doesn't work, But the good news is that they're not that hard, Curran T says, have an interview for a full-time mid-level position soon somewhere I'm previously interviewed. Thinking of, so you were previously interviewed, did they reject you? And then you applied for a second job and now you're interviewing again? Thinking of questions to ask that I didn't before, seconding that informational review really helps. Okay, I see. So you had one interview. This is going to be your second interview for the position. Okay, so second interviews. I know you're asking about the questions, but I just want to say second interviews, there's a couple of things you got to remember for second interviews. Consistency. Whatever you said in the first interview, don't change your story the second interview. That's kind of a thing. Sometimes people end up going off script in an interview, which is not good. That's why you want to vet stories and examples you might say in the interview. Okay. But if you do go off script and you end up saying something, make sure that in the second interview, if they ask you about that again, you say the same thing. Like you don't change your story. Okay. There's so many questions that you could ask. I already sort of addressed that. Was it maybe half an hour ago? Like somebody asked very similar questions. What should I ask them when they say, do you have any questions? So I already kind of answered that earlier in the stream. I've done videos on this. Go watch the videos, maybe. There's a ton of questions you could ask. Some that are good would be like saying, if you can, like, what would be the biggest challenge for the person in this role? Would it be this? And if you can name the thing that's probably going to be the hardest area of the job, then that suggests that you know how to do the job. Okay? If you ask about how they communicate in their team, how they resolve conflicts in their team, what's the trait that people value most when working together with others and collaborating in this environment. If you ask questions of that nature, that signals to them that you care about working nicely with others and getting along with people. That makes you look, much more attractive as a candidate. Another question would be to speak to the genuine interest. So you would ask questions like, what would be the first thing you would like me to accomplish, say in the first 30 days? What would you like to see after the first 30 days, or the first 30, 60, 90 days? What is your expectations for what I should take care of first in this role? Something like that. That shows that you're actually interested in doing this work, right? You're not asking something self-serving like, what are the benefits? How much pay do I get? You're not just out for yourself. You're asking questions that signal things about you, because this is all a performance. It's about making a good impression on them and signaling that you are indeed the person they're looking for. And the person they're looking for can do the job. The person they're looking for has a genuine interest in doing this job. The person they're looking for gets along with everybody, collaborates well, and doesn't rock the boat, So you ask questions like that, and that signals that you're that person. The last question you ask always is some form of, where do we go from here, right? What's the next step? Okay, that for obvious reasons, it gives you some useful information. Also, it also subtly signals that you are interested in this job. You're really wanting it, Okay, so that should get you started with that, hopefully. So I don't care if you ask some of these before, ask them again. Or if they gave you an answer the first time, then ask to go deeper into how it works. Okay, I don't think you'd have, playing the odds, you wouldn't have asked these already, but in case you did, ask it again or some form of it again and just go deeper. I know you said this, but what specifically? Something like that. Okay, so that was Current T. Oh, it continues. On LinkedIn, for some reason, most of the time you aren't allowed to send messages with your connection unless you pay for the premium service. Still sending a connection request can be... Oh, is that new? Okay. I haven't really used LinkedIn properly for a couple of years. It's just dissolved into another kind of useless Facebook thing where people argue about extreme political opinions. That's all I ever see on it. Yeah, listen, in order to do really useful people searches on LinkedIn, you need the premium version. Now, what I recommend to people is I believe they still have that whole 1 month of premium for free, right? So you get a free month if you sign up. So sign up for free, get the free month, cancel before the month, and then you get the whole thing for free. And then do this stuff, just do it like every day, and until you get a bunch of leads, and a bunch of bites. And I'm not sure. I haven't, when I was really using it heavily, that was 5 years ago to build my business. I fortunately haven't needed to go back and really do that again. But I needed the premium version to do all the advanced people searches. So I think I ended up getting it. I can't remember. I got it at one point. It wasn't super amazing. It gave me that one feature, which was, the being able to do a people search where the results were individuals that didn't have to be a first, second, or third degree connection, right? That was like the killer feature. I didn't think this was a thing. I believe I've always been able to send a connection request to anyone, and it prompts you and it says, do you want to send a note? And, most people say no because it's quicker if you say no, but far less effective. And I still get, on a daily basis, I get people sending me connection requests. Most of them don't send a note, but some of them do. And I didn't think the ones that did had premium. So I'm not sure. Eddie DeVere says, a colleague is asking hiring managers at two different companies whether there are any openings for me currently. What should my end game be if they say not at the moment, possibly later? Is it best to get their information so that I can get follow-up with them or reasonable interviews? Well, if they don't have a job for you, why would you follow up? If they've said, no, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. Why would you then want to call them back and check again? The answer is no. Okay, so you keep moving. Now, listen. Generally, there might be some exceptions to this, but the general rule is you search for a job for you, right? Getting someone else to be your agent to put a good word in. Now, if they got some special relationship with these two people, fair enough. But this is not something you rely on. Usually, nobody cares more about your employment than you. So the problem is when you farm it out to somebody else, it doesn't go anywhere really quickly. So if it comes back, if nothing comes of this, let your friend pursue this inquiry with these two managers or whatever, and then with suitably low expectations, if it comes back as a yes, we want to talk to you, great, you go and you talk to them. If it doesn't, you don't sweat it and you keep moving forward. You generate some leads for yourself, okay? You reach out, learn how to reach out to hiring managers in your industry, people that could hire you. They're all accessible to you on LinkedIn, and you have the power to send the perfect message to them that will make them want to talk to you. You have that at your fingertips. All you need now is the knowledge of precisely what to say, Okay, you could look at some examples that I have for free on my YouTube channel. You could take my course if you want to go deeper into that. You could do your own research and learn about these things from other sources. But one way or another, you learn how to reach out to these people yourself. And then you don't just reach out to one or two people. You reach out to 600 people, all in employers near you that have the potential to hire you. Okay? That's not as far-fetched as it sounds. I used to teach this in university to business students. Students got, I feel like an idiot saying this all the time, but students got some bonus points for getting a selfie of them shaking the CEO's hand. They had to do this with companies, but they had to do it with the CEOs of the companies for it to be valid. And they'd get extra points if they got a selfie with them and the CEO while they were there. And a lot of them got that. And these are people that are like 22 years old, 21 years old kind of thing, right? So it's not that hard, if you know what to say and the channel over which to do it. And LinkedIn is the channel you need. Between Google Maps and LinkedIn, you can drum up all kinds of opportunities for yourself. Now, I've done a video that's linked in the description box below that you could, it's a free video just on my channel. If you want to see what that looks like, check out that video. It's called How Successful People Get Jobs. Okay, if you're interested in this and you want to learn more about what I'm talking about, okay? I encourage you. This is like you'd be learning networking. You'd be learning how to create opportunities for yourself directly. Job opportunities, if you're doing contract work for people, like gig work, those opportunities. You know what I mean? And it makes sense to do this with people in your industry. People will know who you are. You'll be a known quantity, right? How many people are there in your industry, in your hometown or your town where you're living, city, whatever, that are in positions that could hire you? Wouldn't it be great if all those people knew who you were? Okay, that's what you can do, right? There's a bit to this. For example, when you contact someone on LinkedIn, what's the first thing they do? They'll be like, who is this person? They click on your profile. Now, if your profile you haven't vetted your profile, you've got a picture on there, but it's you, 3 other people, you're all drunk, you're all partying, it's like, yeah, that's going to kill your chances. You know what I mean? So there is a little bit to this. You've got to do a few things to set it all up so that it all works, right? Okay, but learn how to do it. And there's several different ways of doing this. If you're a more extroverted person, you would want to do this stuff more in person, like face to face, as opposed to over social networking. And that there's a lot of advantages to do that, right? If you're not extrovert, you don't have to do it, but you have to learn different skills. Okay, Alex says, it's my take 2, but I don't want to affect us financially. That's it. I already asked ChatGPT in a practical way. Okay, I don't fully understand what you're talking about. Is this a continuation of your big, long story there? Streams and Beans. Okay, there's a name. It says, hello, mate. I hope all is well. I would like to thank you again for your videos and assistance in previous live streams. I've since received an offer for a solid role plus another final round lined up. Right on. Congratulations, Streams and Beans. That's great to hear. It continues. This is in a super tough business graduate job market in the UK right now too. Well, congratulations. Listen, Streams and Beans, you're obviously hireable. You have a lot to offer. You have a lot of value you can offer an employer, And on top of it, it seems like you got some, certainly at least the basic social skills, networking skills. You got this, So, you know what I mean? People are surprised, like I'm happy for you, and it's great to hear that you're prospering. People are surprised when their job search comes to an end, when they get something, because it really feels like you're unemployable, like you have no value, nobody wants you. That's an illusion. It's this silly process, it's the way we perceive things. A lot of that are doing this activity that don't come from a sales background, so they take rejection very hard. They're not used to being rejected quite as much as this, nowhere near. People who work in sales, they understand this game. They're a lot better equipped to handle things like job search because they recognize it for what it is. You throw a bunch of things out there. You try to do the most effective thing you can do, but you do it in bulk, right? Most things don't work out. Some things do. It's a numbers game. We're Rejection is just the name of the game because most things won't work out. But does that mean you stop? Does that mean you shy away? No. You do even more, and you work on the effectiveness of what you're doing, right? Because that'll give you the higher likelihood of these things turning into opportunities, of unearthing opportunities. But congratulations, Streams and Beans. That's great to hear. It's been nearly 2 hours. If you have any last minute questions, please ask them in the chat. I see there are 29 people here. Thank you for joining me today. You are awesome. Every single one of you. You're doing self-improvement. You keep doing stuff like this. Sooner or later, you're gonna know it all. You're gonna knock it out of the park, which is a baseball expression, which is weird because I don't like baseball especially, but I don't know much about it really. I'm Canadian, so we never really played much baseball up here. But anyway, you're going to be doing just fine. Don't just get your information from one source, from me. As much as I'm flattered by that and I'd like it, get your information from a variety of sources. And what's more important is that you don't just take advice, you try things. Go out and try things. Get some experience. Learn how something is done, and then go and do it. Nobody can tell you you're wrong if you've done it. That's the thing. The internet is a place where people like to argue back and forth on what they think is the right way to do it. It's like, it doesn't matter what people's opinions are. Just go and do it. And if you've succeeded, you know that it works. Streams and Beans says, thank you. Like I got the high, it's I think that, the high five kind of thing. Like you've just said, I do also have some sales experience from previous e-commerce business ventures. Also like to provide some leverage. Yeah, good. It's a good thing. It's like, in a way, I wish a lot of introverts could get some sales experience, like some type of sales thing that they can stomach. You do it mainly on the computer, this kind of thing that, it isn't so bad. It's like posting things and social networking or whatever, right? It's a great experience. Don't shy away from that if you're an introvert, because you'll learn something extremely useful, I'm not a sales guy. I'm an introvert. I'm a technical engineer type. I came up through operations. But, climbing the ladder, it's like you realize how important every area of business is, including sales. And there's a lot of job seekers that could learn things from the sales process. You know what I mean? You could pick up some really useful tips that will help you, right? Just your worldview and like what is needed to achieve things in the real world when nobody's giving you a map of what to do, And you can tailor it. You can tailor it to your personality. When I built my business, I'm an introvert. I don't like going to events and like schmoozing with people. Like some people do that. There's a whole scene where people do that in the business world, in different industries. People are very social. They love to like all get together and talk and have useless meetings and events and things that give each other all kinds of silly awards for no reason, but to take selfies of each other. It's like people love that stuff, and that's all this networking that's going on, I hate that stuff. I did it more in a way that's tailored to me. And I did informational interviews, but only with people that wanted to talk to me. You don't go down there in the hope that they'll talk to you. I want them to ask me to come down. And that's when I went down and met them. And I met quite a few CEOs that way, people I didn't know. It's a very eye-opening experience. I met some really amazing people, like fierce talents at various different things. I also met a couple of real prize dickweeds, if I can use that expression on the internet. I know people really clean up their language online. That's the first thing you need to know about the internet. Take it from me. I know these things. You know what I mean? It's like you tailor it to you. This is the thing. But if you know the principles and you know how things work, you can do that. Alex Roska, how to deal with a micromanager, toxic shift manager that always watches you. What you do is you get a baseball bat Okay? Now, I don't know where you are in the world. Baseball bats might be scarce. They might only come in aluminum. And then you can write their name down the side of the bat. Okay? You bring it to work, because that's perfectly okay. And you rub it lovingly. And you whisper to yourself, soon, soon, where they can see you. You get bonus points if you take a couple of 6-inch nails and put them right through the baseball bat at the end, at the business end, right? That'll take care of any micromanager, I can tell you that much. Listen, I could say a bunch about this. If it's an issue of workplace bullying, there's the official way you handle that stuff, and then there's the unofficial way, right? And if that's what's going on here, you want to try and do things the official way. But as a last resort, if no one will listen to you, no one will address the problem, you could do it. You could do it the unofficial way. And that is something I've learned, and this is not radically original, but something I've learned is that bullies hate it when you fight back. They make your day a misery. They intimidate you. They really can't handle when you visit that back on them and you ruin their day. Then they stop, coincidentally. That's what I've noticed. I've had to deal with that in a past life at the railroad, which was the first sort of industry I went into right after university. So I unfortunately haven't had to deal with that ever again, but that's what it came to. So, you try to avoid doing that. You try to do it officially. Listen, you talk to the person, you make that attempt. It probably goes nowhere, but you try. Then you talk to your boss, their boss, you talk to HR, whatever the official process is, you follow it, right? But if all that fails, sometimes we have to resort to other means. Mehmet says, 70 applications for a job. How many are to be interviewed and pass through final stages usually? Well, it depends. If it's a job online, like on Indeed or LinkedIn, they're getting hundreds. Okay, so 10 times that in terms of number of applications for one single job. Right? That's because only, all the jobs you see, that's only 20% of all the jobs that are actually out there. The other 80 are hidden. They're not posted publicly. So what you're seeing is that's 20% of all the jobs that are there. And what you're getting is something like 80% of the candidates are all applying for those posted jobs that are only 20%. So it's only 20% of the jobs that are getting 80% of the candidates, right? That's why those jobs are so competitive, right? And that's why we see a lot of the silly things going on, because employers can demand whatever the hell they want because they got 700, 800 people applying for these things. You can raise that bar pretty damn high, So if you want to play that game, you have to play by those rules. But fortunately, most people don't get a job like that. They go around all that crap. Alex Rosca says, I'm saying hi to him and he got used to me, but he is always micromanaging the production line, omnipresent. What? And that's it. Is that okay? Well, listen, I keep answering your question. You keep answering me. You keep giving me more of the story, and it's like the variation on the same theme. So I've already sort of answered that. Streams and Beans says, Mehmet, it took me 3. Okay. And Alex Rosca says, Romania. I got a Blu-ray disc recently. And this is going to sort of erode my image as a former CEO. But then again, being on YouTube has already done that for me. I got a Blu-ray of a show in Sofia, Romania. It was called the Big Four, right? The 4 big thrash metal bands like Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer, and Metallica. I've loved that stuff as a teenager and as in my 20s, and I still like it today, even though it's hard to admit that. But I got that, and you Romanians are nuts. I got to say that. You like your thrash metal, and that's awesome. The crowd in Sofia was in the stadium or whatever you guys have there, and People were drunk. People were partying. They were like super into it. It's good to see. That's my impression of Romania, okay, of Romanians. So it's a good thing to me. Anyway, listen, thank you for being here today. Hopefully this was useful for you. If you want to go deeper, I've got a lot of free videos on my YouTube channel, how to answer job interview questions and all this kind of stuff. In addition, check out that course if you're like lost and you don't know what to do and you don't know how people get hired and you don't know what you can do. Check that out. That'll be helpful for you. Okay. If you want to go deeper, if you want, like maybe you're not like desperate for a job right now or something, but you're wanting to tack on some skills that will help you in your career. Okay. Check out that. That's called Write Like a Professional. It's not the greatest title. It is about writing, but it's more about what to say, like what to communicate in different situations. Basically, what I did is I took all the communication skills that I learned going from a supervisor all the way to the CEO and put that into that course. So that's what it is. You have to tack on many other things besides technical skills. Like I've said a lot, you got to tack on financial skills. You got to tack on people management skills. Leadership skills, like all that kind of stuff. But also communication skills, and all the communication skills I put into that course. So if you're interested in learning that with me, check that out. Links to all of these are in the description box under this live stream. And I've also made videos that answer questions about those courses. So, you can see what you're getting. You can see how it works. It's all fully transparent. So check those out. Especially that course is actually very popular. If you just want to learn business, what my core competency actually is business, like how to grow a company and how to make money and all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in learning essentially what you would learn in business school with me for cheap, because it's the best bang for the buck around, check out that, the $100 MBA. Not $100,000, $100. Everything that you would learn in a brick and mortar MBA for $100. The catch is that it's all self-study. You get a reading list, you get all the textbooks, you read them yourself, and you do it on your own schedule. You do it to the depth that you're interested. If you just want to skim it, that's great. If you just want to learn about one area like marketing, you can. It's very flexible. I created this for entrepreneurs and for people that are contemplating a career in business, but they don't know if it's really for them. Check it out. Business is the scientific study of how to make money. It's a pretty useful thing to know. So if you're into that, check out that course. I also do live streams on entrepreneurship and private equity on Mondays and Fridays, respectively. So you could join me for those. Other than that, you guys are awesome. Thanks for being here. And I will see you soon. Take care and best of luck.